Could I urge those of you who are in the back to come to the center, if you don't mind? I really want this to be as tight a circle as we can make it, if you don't object. If you do object and are averse to sitting up front, that's okay. But I really would encourage you to come forward and have your voice be heard here, because really that's what this is all about. Essentially, is being able to articulate what it is we do in a way that is tangible, specific to everyday Americans, and to really hear one another's stories. The iLead initiative that Barbara started, and which those of us who have been kind of championing it since have been working on, is what we call culture of leadership here at the State Department. And by that, the culture is something that we ourselves create. We make our own organizational culture collectively. And obviously, one of the unique things about the Foreign Service is that every Foreign Service career is different. I mean, we make 1,000 choices about where we're going to bid, which languages we want to learn, what kind of hardship levels we're going to put up with, what kind of issues we want to work on, which cone we're in, etc. And so everyone's story is different, and that's what makes it a fascinating career. And us as a collective, a really fascinating group of people. But at the same time, it's relatively easy to go through one's career and have one's very particular idiosyncratic sense of what the work is like. And yet, the more we talk to one another, the more we can appreciate the diversity, the multifaceted dimension of our work, and in particular, to be able to understand in a more rich, nuanced, anecdotal, yes, but diverse sense how what we do makes a difference for our fellow Americans. And Barbara mentioned screwworms. I hadn't heard of screwworms until Barbara told me that story. So I count myself among those who is broadening his own cultural understanding, thanks to Barbara. So let me just, I really do want this to be a conversation. I want it to be about hearing one another. And so the mic will be available for anyone who wants it. Maybe we could bring it into the circle so that it's readily accessible. And I don't know, I'll start by just sharing a couple of anecdotes from my own experience, and inviting you all to do the same, because really I want this to be about our telling our stories and hearing one another's stories. And then maybe toward the end of the hour, we could see if there are any common themes, if there are any takeaways that we can benefit from. So in addition to telling kind of our individual stories about how our work has made a difference for ordinary Americans, if you have any thoughts or suggestions about ways that we can improve our outreach to our fellow Americans, whether as members of the Foreign Service writ large, representatives of the U.S. government in general, as inhabitants of the nation's capital, also known as a swamp, we can try to take those forward and tell a more compelling story about the work we do each and every day and how that matters for everyday Americans. Because I think we would all benefit from being able to do that more cogently, more clearly, more effectively. So 2 things then, your own stories, if you would, and your thoughts and suggestions on how we can make a more compelling case about what we do. Because so often, what happens overseas or even in the halls of the State Department remain mysterious and unknown to many of our peers, our colleagues, and or not our peers and colleagues, but rather our fellow citizens. So in my own particular Foreign Service career, I thought of a couple of things that were impactful in terms of contact with and impact for kind of everyday Americans, and that was when I did consular work. Many of you, I'm sure, have done lots of consular work, and when I don't know if you never really forget your first death case when you have an American citizen who's died, and you have to inform the next of kin about the passing of their family member. And I remember I had was doing a rotational position in Guatemala, my first tour, and I did both the human rights reporting work as well as a consular rotation. And so I had a chance to do work with the human rights community, and there was an activist who came down to Guatemala and was eager to find out what was going on the human rights portfolio. He had worked with an NGO on some of the atrocities that had been committed there, and was eager to get a briefing. And so he walked in the embassy one day and asked to see the human rights officer. And I told him, I said, look, generally we don't kind of do walk-in meetings, but I have a group of students coming in a week's time, and if you'll be here, I'd be delighted if you would join the group. And if there are any questions that you still have after getting the briefing, we can talk about it. He said that's perfect, and so came back with a group of students that was visiting from, I think it was the Penn State University, yeah. A group of students that were there in Guatemala on a field trip, essentially, or a trip abroad. And I had a chance to take an hour and brief them on what was going on, which was great contact with ordinary Americans who were broadening their own understanding of the history of U.S. intervention in Central America, our role in propping up dictators at the time who were committing atrocities, as well as our change of policy that had just taken place a couple of years before, when then President Clinton traveled to Central America and apologized for the U.S. role in supporting tyranny, and committed to helping to support the restitution and the improvement of the human rights situation. So it was a good story to tell about humility and about the change of policy and how that can have a real impact. Anyway, the individual who had walked in joined that briefing, and he appreciated it. He may have had one or two other questions afterward, but he thanked me very much for including him, and he enjoyed the students a lot, and they enjoyed him, and he shared stories of his work in the NGO world. So it was a chance, again, for the confluence, not just with the embassy official, but with someone who worked in NGOs to talk to students as well. Anyway, I was, a month or two later, was doing my, you're given duty on the weekend duty as a counselor, for consular duty, ACS duty. And that's when I got a call from the hospital that there was an American citizen who died. So I went to the hospital, and it was this very gentleman who had been in. And I thought, wow, that's terrible. That I'd just seen him a month or two before, and he was vivacious and energetic and impassioned about the issues. And I remember thinking, this is definitely him, but it wasn't him. When you see a dead person for the first time, for me it was quite startling, quite arresting, because clearly the physical manifestations, the similarity is there, but the spirit was so not there. What animated this person. In fact, the word in Greek for soul is anima, right? Animate, right? It is what animates us. It's what gives us our character. And it was so obvious looking at this dead person that this was him and yet not him. Anyway, it was a very moving thing for me, and it still is, But I thought I'll have to, when I talk to the family and let them know, as was my consular duty, to share with them that I had met their relative, before, and really had connected with him around issues that we were both mutually concerned by, and that to communicate to them the passion he brought to his experience in the country, and how he clearly had that with him until the end. And that was something that meant something to them, because they had always known him to have gotten an interest in this place, Guatemala, somewhere down south of the border, but didn't really fully understand what that meant. And so I was able, in a time of tragedy and sadness, to share something positive and new to them about their loved one who had died. So that was one example that I thought about in my experience. Another one was when I was doing an economic tour in New Delhi, India. I had worked on the line, and many of you know about the line. And once you work on the line, forever thereafter, you get stuck doing visits at whatever posting you go to. It's like, oh, you worked on the line. We got the president coming. It's over to you. So I had just arrived in New Delhi in 2009. And a couple months later, the President Obama was to take his first trip to New Delhi, India. And I got stuck with the role of control officer for the President's visit to Delhi. Which was, of course, I was delighted to do, and happy for the opportunity. But at the same time, trying to learn my portfolio, which was the energy portfolio. But as you may recall, the Obama administration came in on a platform of three kind of pillars. One was healthcare reform, education reform, and clean energy development. Obviously, Obamacare, the Clean Affordable Care Act, was the product of the one platform on healthcare. On education, the Race to the Top initiative became the embodiment of that. And on climate change, clean energy, climate change, the Paris Accords, of course, were a big part of that. But one of the precursors of that was clean energy collaboration and cooperation at the bilateral level. And so knowing that the Obama administration was interested in clean energy collaboration, and my job was the energy portfolio, I worked with the Indians to put together a deliverable for the President's visit, which was something called PACE, the Partnership to Advance Clean Energy, which essentially created a collaboration between the United States and India on clean energy development. And there were several features of it. I won't bore you with the gory details, but suffice to say there were projects to create consortia of companies with energy laboratories and NGOs and think tanks, academic institutions, to identify projects for clean buildings, algal biofuels, all these different clean energies, solar. There were projects which were about business-to-business partnerships. Anyway, there were numerous different facets to the deliverable. But when the President came, he signed off on it, and it was blessed by the National Security Council and the rest. And for the next 3 years, I had my work cut out for me to implement this agreement. And what began as a energy collaboration, which involved about $60 million in business, became a $6 billion bilateral clean energy relationship, which involved hundreds of companies, the OPIC, Overseas Private Investment Corporation, the Exim Bank, the World Bank, the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, as well as lots and lots of private sector and academic organizations. And many of the businesses on the U.S. side were small startup companies that had been founded by, guess what, Indian engineers who were had studied in the United States and stayed on and started startup companies, particularly in the solar arena, but in all kinds of clean energy areas. And they had maybe a connection back to India through their university or through their business partners. And this was an opportunity for them to really ramp up their business-to-business collaboration, finance new projects, start new initiatives. And in the end, the scale was 100 times bigger than when we started. And now that market is a very important one for U.S. solar production. And I did the math, and I think the calculation was something like for every $1 billion, you create 15,000 U.S. jobs. So 6 times 15 was what, 90,000 jobs created in that. So I felt very proud of that accomplishment and very pleased to have been able to both contribute to what was a meaningful policy initiative and a bilateral part of our relationship, as well as a real job creator for a sector that was arguably very important in the U.S. economy. So those were two very different anecdotes, one a very personal kind of individual story, and the other one about kind of leveraging a position to create a market where there wasn't one before. So, yeah.
My name is Bob Beecroft. I've been in the Foreign Service since before most of you were born. 1971, my wife and I joined. And I'm looking at the topic, which is how my Foreign Service work makes a difference for Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And the question seems to me is, do we have a problem? I would wager that if the election had gone otherwise, we'd say, what problem? But now there is this sense that what we do and the importance of what we do is not appreciated outside of the swamp, and sometimes not even inside the swamp. What we do is indirect in many cases. We work with foreigners. Yes, depending on your cone, some of us work more with Americans, and that's great. But in my case, I'm a political officer with a lot of military background. So just a very quick anecdote. When I came back from 3 years on the nuclear arms talks with the Soviet Union, when there was a Soviet Union, called SALT II, it was in Geneva. That was not exactly a hardship assignment. I was asked if I would become a salt seller. I was supposed to go sell the SALT treaty to Americans. And so I ended up in places like Little Rock, Arkansas. Anybody here from Little Rock? No? All right. I always ask. And I was on a PBS show, call-in show. And the first call, they introduced me, Mr. Beecroft's with the State Department. He's here to talk about why nuclear arms control is good for you and so on and so forth. The first caller says, "You say Mr. Beecroft's from the State Department?" "Yeah." "The State Department of what?" And I knew it was going to be a long night. In some places like Little Rock, the State Department means very little to nothing. And that's part of our problem. There's a difference between what we do overseas and what we do in the United States. And I think what we're really trying to look at is how we can improve our message domestically. I could say, and I did say, that what we did on the SALT II negotiation was make it less likely that the American people will get nuked. Well, that's a direct impact if it happens. But if it's not, it doesn't mean that much. It's abstract. I later ran an 800-person peacekeeping operation in Bosnia. Now, there were a lot of Americans involved in that, but they were all in uniform, or they were foreign service. So to explain to the American people that what you're doing may not seem immediately in their interest, but is the challenge, it seems to me. I run the program committee at the American Academy of Diplomacy, and we're working with AFSA, thank you, Barbara, but also with the World Affairs Councils of America and with HR, which is now getting involved, to get the word out. And we're going to be going to 6 World Affairs Councils between now and the summertime, just to address the question that you've raised. And thank you for raising it, because it's the right question at the right time. That said, I think we all take the same oath. Whether we're foreign service or civil service, we take the oath. And the important thing to tell the American people, in my case, I took it twice. I took it as a military officer and then as a foreign service officer. Somewhat different, but both oaths are to the Constitution, not to the President. Yeah. So getting that message out, that we're here to serve you, thank you for paying our salaries, let us tell you what we do for you, that's, it seems to me, the priority right now. Thank you.
And thank you for what you've done for, for us. Yeah, why don't we go here and then here, okay?
So in that spirit, I'd like to put in a plug. My colleague Hillary Olson-Windecker and I are here from the U.S. Diplomacy Center, and we are working to tell that story. We are putting together the content for this museum and education center, which will tell the story of American diplomacy to Americans. That's what we're aiming to do. So we are on the ground trying to collect stories, and I'm sure that you have stories. You may have artifacts as well. So come and tell us about them, or I can give you my card and you can send me information about how we promote. We've sort of lined it up, and the 4 pillars that we look at are peace, prosperity, democracy, and development. And all of the things that we do sort of fit loosely under those pillars. One of the stories that I love to tell about myself is that I became a Foreign Service officer after having studied abroad. And it, as many of us, it changed my life. There was a professor that I realized later was a Fulbrighter, an American who was over where I was studying, and he was teaching about the United States, and I became sort of the deputy defender-in-chief of the United States, and that's how I got started explaining what the United States was as a career. But and I've subsequently tried to help other people study abroad, Americans study abroad, and other foreign students come to the United States. And because I do understand how that can impact not only the individuals, but larger populations. So that's my 2-part message. Thank you.
Just ask a follow-up question. Are you going to have a virtual diplomacy center as well as the physical one once it's created here? That's one part of the 2-part question. Second is, are you involved with the folk life? What is there's the StoryCorps? StoryCorps, which is run out of the Smithsonian Folk Life Center. Yeah, oral histories, and collecting those for Foreign Service.
We certainly plan to have a robust online presence in addition to our physical presence. We will start, I think, we've got a website already. We are revamping it, and it has a lot of educational materials. Our target audience is high school and college students, largely, but we will be ramping that up when we will have a lot online. We will have simulations for classrooms and other activities as well. And we are collaborating with ADST, the Association for Diplomatic Studies and Training, out at FSI, and hope to glean a lot of nuggets from their oral histories to incorporate into our content for the stories of diplomacy.
Do you know, are you going to do this in writing? Are you going to do video clips? Do you have any idea of how you plan to present?
We will be largely multimedia. So I've started doing video clips. We will also use the audio clips that ADST has and try to incorporate, if we have a good audio clip, maybe we'll put it with a photo and so that people can hear it. But it will also be, in text and in a lot of different ways. We're trying to create that dynamic feel that the young people of today insist on. And it can't just be some print on the wall or a static picture, but how far we can go with all of that is still to be determined. But we do hope to make it very interactive and appealing to this young audience. And we are also working with HR and with other organizations to try to include now that you know about this, how can you get involved? Both if you want to as a career, there will be an exhibit about careers in the Foreign Service, and there will also be a citizen diplomacy exhibit to talk to people and say, even if you're not going to be involved, once you go home, how can you stay involved? Even if they read their newspaper in a different way or watch the news in a different way, we've accomplished something. So there are lots of different angles, but it's a very ambitious project, and we are working hard to get there, but we need the support of all of you and all of your stories to include.
Please.
That's good. I guess just the other thing is just to remember that we don't.
Oh,
that
it won't pick up.
that we can't just have. It's not like an archives, and it's not like ADST. So we really need the thing, and if the thing is either some object, like Heather and I were in Kabul together, I gave them a little personal, my protective health kit. I thought 'cause one of the things we want to talk about is the challenges and dangers of being in the Foreign Service. So stuff that you might have that can be the underpinning for an interesting story, because it can't just be words, and especially young people have very little patience to read things. So you have to pin it on either from a photograph or some video. It's really hard. Most of us don't have photographs of us doing things. If we've taken, I mean, nowadays people are always taking pictures of themselves. But I think most of us, if you probably look at your photos, it tends to be of the thing that you were putting together. You know, the visit or the speakers or the, you know, but it's not like you doing something. So please, what we would really like is the photographs that show people doing something, you know, diplomacy in action, not the stand up, I'm in front of a podium, or this is the group I sent to the United States on the International Visitor Program.
Yeah.
But how to find this action shot that actually shows, I don't know, whatever you were doing with those things you were talking about. But if, you know, something that's an active, something that's an active photo. And that's what we actually are looking for. We want to be able to explain in these different exhibits. There's such a range of topics. It goes from the very basic, the bilateral relations that the United States has with each country. And then there's all the topics that are those 4 pillars that Judith was mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's other exhibits on the changing face of the Foreign Service, how it went from the elite white men to, yeah, that's right, how it went from that to allowing the rest of us. Life in an embassy. So we're looking for all kinds of things. You've got some cool photos of, you know, the I don't know, the Easter egg hunt in 1970, Kazakhstan or something. But, you know, looking for things that actually show life in the Foreign Service. So we have quite a range of exhibits that we want to do.
Yeah. I know that AFSA has been supportive of the Diplomacy Center, and we, of course, are have common cause in your success.
And money, of course. Don't forget that. We don't have enough money yet.
Good. Please.
Thanks. And my name's Andre Goodfriend. And just to touch on a couple of different themes, actually the second point I'll make is very much allied with this discussion on how do we present what we're doing to the American public. But another thread is on how we're affecting American society. I wanted to mention, because today is the Tibetan New Year, Losar, and 25 years ago I was in New Delhi when we had a program for the immigration of 1,000 Tibetans, and with a very political motive to try to bring over this community. They wanted to have Americans be aware of what the Tibetan situation was, because there were very few Tibetans outside of Nepal and India and Tibet, China. So there was a political motive for this, but now 25 years later, there are over tens of thousands of Tibetans in the United States, and this was a program that changes American society when you bring over with this purpose communities and integrate them into the United States with it broadens this understanding of the world overall and changes the nature in a positive way, I think, of American society. So 25 years ago, 1992, we issued our first displaced Tibetan visas, and the community is celebrating New Year now in the United States. On the other theme of engagement and how we communicate our story to the American public, this, I think, we've done in a number of different ways, and I've tried to have it as a constant theme in the work that I've done, whether in consular or in other capacities. After coming back to the United States from being, from my first 3 overseas assignments, I was in international organizations when we were when we put together the Kosovo Diplomatic Observer Mission, and the idea there was we have media presentations of what's happening in Kosovo, which could be exaggerated. Who knows what the truth is? So let's put diplomatic observers on the ground who will report back what they're seeing. Now, we couldn't have it doesn't make much of a difference if we don't tell the public what these observers are seeing. So in many ways, this sort of changed the game because these reports, these diplomatic reports of what was happening on the ground, were made public, which was a difference. It put a counter to the media story, but also highlighted that the State Department is playing a role and knows what it's doing on the ground there. At the same time, I thought in international organizations, let's have discussions with the public. This was back in 1999. Internet was still relatively new, but we were getting blindsided by NGOs. I think the thing which caught my attention and caught our attention was on the landmines, and landmine removal, and that because NGOs were engaging electronically on these new media, whether by email, but not able to engage with us. When we would go to conferences, we'd be blindsided. So the question, well, how can we use these technologies, as with what we did in Kosovo, to not just present, but to engage? So we set up, I think, our first online discussion with a desk officer, as opposed to public diplomacy, on something innocuous, the Millennium Goals for the Millennium Assembly of the United Nations. Let's bring together online and have that discussion. And after that, at different posts, when I went as a consular officer in London, in Damascus afterwards, where I had the pleasure of being inspected by Ambassador Beecroft, we thought, well, let's not. How do we make our work relevant to Americans, not during a crisis?
Yeah.
So we thought, well, rather than wait for them to come to us and when there is a crisis, or reaching out to them during a crisis. And in London, we had a crisis at that time with the attacks on the tube, on the terrorist attacks. Mm-hmm. Damascus, I was there during the closure of the embassy. But before those crises, we had started regular newsletters to the public. We put together, in Damascus, we put together a Facebook page. And we were soliciting feedback. We wanted the public to know that we were there not just during crises, but so we had to put ourselves on the other side of the wall. Mm-hmm. What would we want to know if we, as private citizens, and have that conversation and have it be ongoing, and not just when there is a crisis. So now back here, I was working on the open government plan for the State Department, identifying how are the ways that we're making our work transparent to the public. How are we, there are 3 pillars: transparency, public participation, and collaborative effort. Mm-hmm. How are we collaborating? How are we facilitating public participation in our work? How are we making our information transparent? Mm-hmm. And there are many, many, many ways that we do that, but we don't even know what they are from one office to the other within the State Department. Mm-hmm. So this was a catalog that we put together of what are we doing, whether it is on open mapping and providing mapping tools so that the public can assist in mapping remote places in Asia or Africa, and have mapathons. INR is providing that information, or virtual student foreign service, where we bring members of the public in. They don't even have to, they don't have to come to Washington, but they are part of State Department work. Yeah. And it creates these opportunities for engagement, and there are many, many, many more things that we put in the plan. Right. The opportunities for engagement where it's not during a crisis, it is regular interaction, and I think these are different ways that we've made our work relevant to the public at large.
Is that report available that we could maybe look at it? And
it's still on, it's on state.gov/open.
State.gov/open. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you very much. Interesting.
I have a question. How many people have actually used hometown diplomats and spoken somewhere? Because I find that is a key way to get to the younger people, if you will, and then I've actually spoken somewhere and was there the next day, and one of the students came up and said, you know, I was telling everything to my mom and dad,
Uh-huh.
and they were very surprised
Yeah,
about what you were doing. So I think that's something that we all should take advantage of when we're back in the States, particularly.
definitely. Yeah.
My name is Priscilla Sampil. I'm a new Foreign Service officer. I joined in July.
Welcome.
Thank you. I work for USAID. Before joining the Foreign Service, I worked as a contractor for USAID and state, and also as a direct hire from Peace Corps in Conakry, Guinea, and in Togo. I think that global health issues can be a point of resonance with the American people. And I'm thinking particularly of the issues around the Ebola crisis
Mm-hmm.
in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. That was very spun up in the U.S. press.
Also happened right in the middle of a election, as I recall.
Exactly, yeah, which was, in my opinion, part of the reason why it was particularly spun up. But anyway, and it created a very visceral fear for people. I was in Guinea at the time, and that mission did not evacuate. The entire staff and EFMs remained, whereas in Liberia and Sierra Leone, both those posts went on order departure.
Right.
So what I'll say is that that response required coordination from multiple government agencies working with the host country governments, CDC, DOD, Department of State, USAID, and so on. However, in my recollection, what you saw in the US press was very much, it was particularly the CDC that came out strongly focused as a leader of that effort. And I think that a lot of credit went to CDC, and I won't say undue, but I don't think it reflected the fact that CDC could not have participated to the degree that it did without very strong interagency support, particularly from state and USAID.
Yep.
Because in all three of these places, goodness, in Guinea, the last time I remember seeing anybody from CDC as a rep would have been more than 10 years ago, and a single person, never mind a whole country operation involving, 45 TDYers at a time going to all corners of the country.
So is your sense that that was a missed opportunity on the part of the interagency
It was a
and of
missed
state?
it was a missed opportunity. But here's the problem. The post that's in crisis that's dealing with that is not thinking about how we look in the media
Right.
and how this story is being told. The Post is dealing with a crisis. And it's really, I think, not in people's nature who do this sort of work to really necessarily want to be up front and center and
Yeah.
invest a lot of time on thinking about how.
It seems like ambulance chasing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'll stop here, but I think just an observation, it might be useful to try and think of strategies to help when you have these critical moments that can really help send a strong message about the very direct impact that the Foreign Service has on the American people.
Thank you for sharing that story. Certainly. Let's pass the mic to the ambassador.
Sorry to break in again, but you really touched a nerve there. We served 3 years in Burkina Faso, so we love the neighborhood. Where is PA? There is a Bureau of Public Affairs in the State Department that supposedly is responsible for this kind of outreach. No. Well, if they're not, maybe we ought to look at a redefinition of responsibilities. There certainly should be somebody on the 7th floor, it seems to me, who would task the responsible bureau, and it seems to me that PA is a no-brainer to me.
Well, thank you for that. Barbara, did you want to speak to that?
I did, because AFSA's been working on this outreach story, obviously with partners, but this has been a major thrust of what this governing board's been trying to do. One of the things, this is not a fully formed thought, but one of the things that has really become clear to me is that unlike DOD, which does a terrific job of anticipating these public affairs opportunities, just like they do a terrific job on the Hill arguing for the resources that you need for a fully, kitted out, staffed military. That's not what PA does. PA argues foreign policy issues, but it doesn't really see its job as to promote the Foreign Service's role in delivering those. And legislative affairs largely is about getting the votes for the Iran deal, but it's not really about making sure that the Foreign Service has what it needs. And so I think we think somebody's doing those jobs, Bob, but I think when you really look at it, that is not how the people in those positions see it as their job, which is how you end up with a bit of a void here.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to USIA when we had we weren't allowed. There was a strict Smith-Munt separation, and you weren't allowed to do anything that impacted
Does
the
that
domestic
still exist?
audience.
Is that restraint still there? Or
Well, to a large extent, it's not. But what it actually means is, like, even now we can't use the Diplomacy Center. We still can't use anything that is written or published by IIP because our focus is domestic. So it has opened up quite a bit, but there is still that division. So when you look at what's the role of PA, it is very much you talk to the domestic press corps. The rest of PA, us or the public affairs and public diplomacy, but the whole rest of it, the ECA and the IIP, still is operating on these are the programs and it's bringing Americans maybe abroad. It's ECA, but IIP, everything they do is geared towards the foreign audience.
Can I ask, is your background in public affairs? Julie Nutter and I were planning on having a conversation separately about working with sister cities programs, which I know are subsidized in part through public affairs, and using that as a way to tap into many cities around the country which have interest overseas, linking those in a more proactive way with posts overseas, consulates overseas, etc., as well as telling the story of the role of the Foreign Service and how that we can be supportive of their efforts as well. But that was what Julie and I talked about doing. But it gets to the broader question about a kind of gap analysis that we could do, where, that's just one opportunity, but there may be a more systematic look or analysis we could do of where the restrictions are still in place, preventing us from capitalizing more effectively on telling the story of the Foreign Service.
Basically, I think that the gap analysis is a good idea. There's other organizations besides sister cities. Now that we're in the Diplomacy Center, what used to be called, the states had the international visitor operations. Now it's called Global Ties, and that's a very active group of citizen diplomats that are probably even better. I don't know. They're, I think, more committed than sister cities to really telling the story of with the Foreign Service, but they only see it from a particular angle.
I'm not as familiar with them, so maybe we can compare notes offline. If you want to stay after the session, we could maybe talk more about that.
But I think it's this gap analysis, because it isn't anybody's job in the State Department to reach out with what does the Foreign Service do? Because that wasn't something that anybody was ever worried about before this recent administration. You didn't have to we were.
I did want to rebut, just with all due respect that you are due, and you do a lot. We have been on this long before this election because we were we did not believe we were well enough understood or defended and had people across the 50 states who would stand up for us under the last administration either. So I have to say, this is not something we discovered on November whatever. That's
good. Thank you. Please.
Yeah, I'm Chris Degnan. I am also a public diplomacy officer, and I worked on the latest QDDR. And one of the things I work, the Quadrennial Diplomacy and Development Review, one of the things I worked on, including with Judith and some of the folks, and through my colleague Peter, we worked through AFSA quite a bit. And well, one of the things we worked on was this idea of engaging America, and we took a lot of ideas from AFSA. We listened to what they were saying, and also made our own observations in writing that report. And I don't think, and I'm certainly an amateur on legislation having to do with public diplomacy, so this is not gospel by any means, but I think it's attitudinal. The barrier's attitudinal. It's not legislative at this point. I think we might actually have an opportunity because what we have right now, or what we had previously, is we had the Matt Lees of the world driving what PA did every day. We had the pool reporters at the State Department who the bureaus spent all their time trying to anticipate what these people would ask and try to respond to it. Now we're not having a daily briefing, and people are complaining about it. But what I think it might give us a chance to do, depending on what the new secretary and the people he appoints at some point will drive us to do. But I think we have a chance to redefine PA. We have a chance to redefine what it means to do public affairs for the State Department. And even if it's not specifically targeted for the Foreign Service, even if it's just, what does the State Department do? What does USAID do? What does whatever we're going to call BBG do? Whatever comes of that. This gives us a chance. Maybe we don't need to be out in front of the podium every day. DOD isn't out in the front. They don't have a daily briefing. Why do we have to have one? So maybe this is an opportunity that PA can sort of redefine itself for the 21st century and be that advocate for what the foreign affairs agencies are doing for the American people around the world.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for that suggestion. Maybe we can also see if you'd be interested in joining our little gap analysis team. Okay. Not a hard sell for me, but an open invitation. Let me see if there are others who haven't spoken yet who would like to contribute. I really would welcome your, and then we'll return to you as well.
Hi, everybody. Thanks again for this wonderful meeting. My name is Brian Chang, also a new Foreign Service Officer at USAID. Just wanted to just reiterate a few points, but also, I think a lot of what we do, having worked in international development, it's so unknown. Even explaining to my parents or family or friends, it's like they still don't understand what it is. So there's a larger question, right? So it is hard.
Diplomacy starts at home. I like
exactly,
to say, yeah.
exactly. I really think that, and this is the first time I actually heard about the hometown diplomats. I think that's really a great opportunity, and how, to the extent that A100s and also any new hires can be involved in that, from the very beginning. I think that would be really, really helpful. But I really do feel that hitting the pavement, reaching out to people in places of worship and VFW halls and farmers markets and high schools, colleges, grad schools, everywhere. I think that's and starting that conversation, because then you can really dispel some myths and some inaccuracies, right, in the work that we do. I think that's that could go a long way. So
Yeah,
that's it.
Thank you. I guess maybe this is a follow-up question for you. Is what would be the right hook, or what would be the right strategy for? Because it's such a vast country. There are so many different populations that we'd want to reach. What would be any thoughts on what would make sense as a good way to start?
Yeah, definitely. I happen to live in Cumberland, Maryland, for quite some time in the past few years, and really saw that there was a great. Just to be broad, but I think Americans really do have great hearts, and the volunteerism spirit. Be if it's breast cancer or other homelessness, other issues. I think that would really resonate with people, and then so it's really easy to make a tie, I think, to that and the work that we do. We're trying to give people a hand up around the world, right? And so it's I think it's fairly easy to make that link, and it would resonate. So that's one idea.
Volunteer organization.
Yeah, or volunteerism, Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Thank you. All right. Anyone who hasn't spoken yet before we return to? Okay, please. Yeah.
Just actually a very quick follow-up.
Please.
Actually, with the hometown diplomats. These are people going out and communicating with the public as humans, as people, explaining what we do. and we need to be able to also factor in social media.
Right.
Because we have a lot of our colleagues now who are, wondering how do they talk about what they do on social media.
Sure. Yeah.
The guidelines, they're being looked at,
Sure.
rewritten, and it's not
Sure.
clear.
Absolutely.
How do we make sure that that they are liberal enough that our colleagues have the ability to communicate and to have discussions with the public via social media in the same way we would expect them to be open and human and express their own perspectives
Sure.
through the Hometown Diplomat program.
Yeah, no, and it raises an excellent question of, is there some more systematic way in which we could increase the participation in the Hometown Diplomats program, maybe through outreach to A100 classes, getting people engaged in that very early on in their careers, but also having some mechanism for following up as people move through their careers. That's what we were thinking with Sister Cities. It might be an opportunity to link into that as people go home, when they come back on home leave, if they go, if they're from Cincinnati and there happens to be a Sister Cities organization and or an opportunity to speak at a community or volunteer event, I don't know, maybe that's find some way to get those linkages kind of more effectively made. Please, yeah.
Hi, my name is Ben Lawrence. I'm also a new Foreign Service Officer with USAID.
Welcome. Yeah, that's
I've
great.
essentially spent my life in the Foreign Service. My father was a contractor to USAID, so I spent most of my life outside of the States. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of passionate about getting people to understand what it is people do overseas.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking with this hometown diplomats, my perception is that it's for senior, advanced people to talk about what people do. But I'll give it a little story. When I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, and we brought I brought my children to an environmental exhibit, if you will, for I think it was some place in Rockville, and they're talking about like green technology, and we thought, okay, this would be a great little kid event, right?
Yeah.
And I'm starting to think to myself, why is aid not here?
Yeah.
I mean, we do this with clean water. We do this with solar panels. I was on a project in Macedonia where we were doing horticulture for grape
Sure.
farmers. It's like,
Yeah.
well, why aren't we talking about that here? It's like, okay, we can do it in Rockville, but we also do it overseas where it saves lives
Yeah.
as opposed to saving money here.
Yeah.
And there's a, do we need senior advanced people to do this, or can this be done on a really grassroots level? And I find that I have to keep on reiterating what I do to my family, not my family, but my extended family, like cousins and aunts and uncles, as to, it's not the CIA. We actually work with people. Why are you in the deserts in South Sudan? It's like, well, I'm working with people to get them to understand how to do work with the government.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
I just think that it's like essentially everybody can and probably should be one.
Yeah.
Is my point.
Well, I mean, I guess one follow-up question is, is it worth cross-fertilizing across foreign service agencies? If state has a hometown diplomats program, can we share with what we do with AID and FCS and others about, you have one as well?
But USA does have a hometown diplomat program. It's up. There's a page on our agency website about it, but it is not necessarily something that new officers are told about.
Right.
Yeah.
No, and I think there is this assumption that you have to be senior to do it, but that is not the case. I mean, in fact, in Guatemala, I mentioned doing a human rights work there. Someone from the World Affairs Council came, who was from Alaska, of all places, Anchorage, Alaska, and asked if I wanted to address the World Affairs Council in Alaska. And I said, me? I'm a first tour officer. Surely you want the ambassador. And he, no, we want the expert, the human rights officer. So I wound up going to Alaska. It was ironic because I went in, and it turns out the governor of the state was at the airport when this guy met me there. And he said, let me introduce you to the governor. So I got to meet the governor. He said, oh, you get extra points for coming in the winter, because I went back on winter break. And of course I had to borrow a down coat because my coat was completely inadequate to the Alaska winter. But yeah, I mean, I'm the first tour officer was able to do it. But I had the blessing of my ambassador to do it. Prudence Bushnell said, go and do it. Yeah. So, yeah, please.
Alaska is a surprising one. I know the former head of that World Affairs Council, and one of the reasons she says that having members of the Foreign Service come work so well in Alaska is that their entire economy is export driven, and they depend on us to open up markets for the fish and to get the fish exports. You know, they reseeded their salmon with their oil money, and so the salmon is a huge part of their economy, and fish doesn't wait. You've got to get the phytosanitary obstacles removed and get it to the market. And also they're a major hub for cargo flights, and so who is it that negotiates cargo flights and all these routes? That would be those of us in the Foreign Service at state. So it's not hard at all in Alaska to explain how your livelihood depends on our forming effective partnerships with governments overseas so that your fish continues to flow and your cargo planes continue to land. And that is one of the secrets, I think, to when these stories land, is figuring out what your audience is all about and how what we do makes their lives possible. And that, I think, is the tricky part. It's kind of, we always used to talk about the last 3 feet in public diplomacy. It's that last part, and then also in infrastructure projects, right? It's that last part to figure out the audience you're talking to and how I'm from Florida. Screwworm is a huge issue for us. When it jumps the barrier, it costs us a fortune, and it really destroys the cattle industry. So figuring that out, and of course I worked on that. We keep the barrier at the Darien Gap in Panama. But it's that part about figuring out how my work affects your livelihood and keeps you safe and secure and prosperous. That, I think, is the challenge we really have to focus on. Just telling stories that don't connect with our audience aren't going to take us where we need to go.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. I'm just mindful of the time. I realize it's 1 o'clock. Let me see if there are any folks who haven't had a chance to talk who would like to speak, or in that case, maybe I could just suggest, I've taken notes throughout this, and obviously we've got a recording as well, but I'm definitely going to review the state.gov/open as well as the QDDR Engaging America. I'll follow up with those who want to do a gap analysis about public affairs. And I'll also, I mean, if you're interested in kind of brainstorming about the how to expand the Hometown Diplomats program, whether it's going to A100 classes or starting out with the entry level folks, I mean, I'm happy to set up a time to meet and talk through that separately, because I think that would be something, and I don't want to speak for AFSA when the president is here to speak for AFSA, but that I think we would have common cause in wanting to amp that up as much as we could, and more effectively tell our story. Those were the takeaways that I had. Using social media is obviously going to be a part of that, but trying to figure out those linkages. And so those are a number of the kind of ways ahead I've been able to glean from this conversation. Are there other things that I've missed that folks would want to focus on? Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to take the floor again, but very quickly, I think you have to think about the case studies that are being done at Georgetown. Barbara Bodine, Ambassador Bodine, heads their institute. And these case studies are they give all kinds of perspective on a whole lot of different areas. Mm-hmm. And if at least somebody in Barbara's office or Barbara herself were brought into the dialogue, I think you'd benefit from it.
Okay. I think we may know someone in AFSA who has connections to Ramon. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Perfect. We'll follow up. Are there any other follow-up suggestions? All right. Well, in that note, let me thank you all for joining us today for this conversation. It's been eye-opening for me, and I hope it has been for you as well. And it's given, I think, some good tangible suggestions about how to improve our outreach to ordinary Americans. So thank you very much.